She turned and saw a great white moon looking at her over the hill, and her breast opened to it. She was cleaved like a transparent jewel to its light. She wanted the moon to fill into her. She wanted more communion with the moon. Consummation.
With these words did the English novelist D.H. Lawrence describe his heroine's sensual, mystical relationship to the Earth's bright satellite. As countless artists and poets before him, he portrayed the moon as an external symbol of a romantic mood which, at some time or other, possesses most of us. However, many other men of imagination throughout the ages have regarded the moon not as a symbol of love, but rather as a direct source of evil. To them, the moon means madness, lust, and violence. The moon has also appealed to man's uncomplicated spirit of adventure, and a manned flight was subject 60 years ago for one of the first motion pictures ever made. The cameras at Cape Kennedy today are not focused on make-believe. They are prepared to photograph the great adventure itself. For within an incredibly short time, we expect to send men to the moon and return them safely to Earth. The name given this national goal is Project Apollo. It is indeed an exciting goal. It is also an extremely costly one.
22, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17.
For many men in the street, however, Apollo's significance is often lost in the wake of more immediate earthbound concerns.
9, 8, 7, 6,
Moon,
5,
moon, just
4,
get me home.
3, 2, 1, lift off.
(1970) is the target date for landing Americans on the lunar surface. Approximately $30 billion will be the price to American taxpayers. Myths, romances, and poetry about the mysterious moon have never cost mankind anything. Now, the harsh reality of the pocketbook raises new questions of purpose, priority, and method. During the next hour, we shall explore these questions with leading scientists and statesmen, and also present a comprehensive film report on the progress of Project Apollo, perhaps the most daring venture in history.
We were given the unbelievable luck of having an opportunity of energizing our spirit by the idea of going to the moon, by the idea of man leaving the earth, going to the next celestial body and setting personally foot on it.
But the great majority of scientists feel that this is rather a waste of money and that it should not have the priority that has been allocated to it.
I would say that we have about a 50-50 chance, or maybe a little better, of beating the Russians to the lunar base and return with a manned shot.
I see no military advantage in putting a man on the moon. I'm told by good scientists that there's no real scientific advantage. It's purely a stunt, and I don't think it's worth $30 billion.
These phony reasons that are advanced for the program will, in the long run, work against the public acceptance of the space program. I'd like to get it back on target by emphasizing the original purposes of the space program, which should be space research and not jobs in Southern California.
Yes, we can make it by 1970, provided we don't uncover some unexpected scientific or environmental condition that we had not anticipated.
Comments on Project Apollo, the United States manned expedition to the moon. I'm Bill Stout. An estimated $30 billion will be required to complete this controversial program before 1970. One perspective on what this vast sum represents in everyday terms was given by Dr. Warren Weaver of the Alfred Sloan Foundation. With $30 billion, he reported, we could build and endow more than 50 large universities, give $10 million each to 200 of our best colleges, finance 50,000 seven-year fellowships, create 10 new medical schools, and give a 10% salary raise over a 10-year period to every teacher in the United States. The final cost of Project Apollo will be enormous and is now a critical point of contention relative to the program's future. 1970, men on the moon, 238,000 miles in space. Can we? Can't we? Should we? Shouldn't we? Issues which could not have been taken seriously 10 years ago are today subjects for serious debate. Ever since October 1957, when the Soviet Union orbited the first man-made satellite around the Earth and heralded the official beginning of the space age. For 3 months, Sputnik's ethereal course was followed by the eyes of an amazed world. With barely time to blink, we saw this feat followed by the launching of the first living creature into outer space. Laika proved that survival in this airless region was possible. She also demonstrated further that Russian technology was equal, if not superior, to that of the United States. Late in January 1958, we hurled our first object into space, Explorer 1. Although lighter in weight than Sputnik, it was a much more complex instrument, and it relayed back to Earth the profound discovery that a belt of lethal radiation surrounds our planet at an altitude of 300 miles. The dramatic new knowledge acquired from succeeding American satellites was abruptly overshadowed by the flight of Vostok 1 in April 1961. Major Yuri Gagarin, the first man to enter space, had orbited the Earth for 108 minutes and returned safely. Another non-military but politically potent blow had been struck against the non-communist world. 3 weeks later, however, Commander Alan Shepard's 15-minute suborbital flight was to diminish the propaganda value of the Soviet achievement. Although far less spectacular than Gagarin's mission, Freedom 7 convinced the world that America had accepted the challenge, that we were moving more cautiously, perhaps, but by televising the event, we were keeping nothing secret. While space matters now appeared to be running well for the United States, international affairs, namely in Cuba and Berlin, were in a critical state. The administration felt the need for a specific national goal which it thought could capture the people's imagination and bolster their self-esteem. On May 25, 1961, in a special session of Congress, President Kennedy set forth the challenge.
Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
9 months later, on February 20th, 1962, the United States was ready to attempt its first manned orbit of the Earth. Colonel John Glenn had been selected to command Friendship 7. His every movement on this momentous, suspense-filled day was to be recorded and transmitted to an anxious America. Soviet cosmonaut German Titov had orbited the Earth several months earlier. But Glenn's flight meant more than simply keeping up with the Russians. Since the president's address, the space budget had been increased twofold, and the Project Apollo phase of the program given top national priority. We were no longer exploring space only. We were going to the moon by 1970, and this flight was to be our first major step.
3, 2, 1, 0.
Godspeed, John Glenn.
Operating. We're underway. You're loud and clear. Roger. We're programming and roll okay. A little bumpy along about here. Roger. Backup clock is started. Fuel 102, 101. Oxygen 78, 100. Amps 27. Roger. Loud and clear. Flight path is good. 69. Roger. Check's okay. Oh, that view is tremendous. Roger, down has started. Roger, capsule turning around, and I can see the booster just a couple of 100 yards behind me. Beautiful. Roger, reading you loud and clear. Roger, coming into IQ a little bit. Had a little contrail went by the window or something there. Main chute is on green. Chute is out in reef condition at 10,800 feet and beautiful chute.
John Glenn's 4-hour and 56-minute flight restored confidence in America's image as a world leader in technology. Moreover, it reinforced our enthusiasm and belief in the goals of Project Apollo. We could and would land on the moon by 1970. These are exclusive films of Valentina Tereshkova training in Tyurtan, Central Asia. On June 16, 1963, she was to become the first woman, and at this date, the last human being, to enter space. Although Premier Khrushchev has repeatedly stated Russia is not in a race to the moon with the United States, he doesn't deny the Soviet Union is intent on pursuing dramatic achievements in space. The flights of Valentina and Colonel Valery Bykovsky, launched 2 days earlier, bear this out. According to Russian scientists, the purpose of their joint flight was to compare the biological and psychological effects of long-duration flight on male and female systems. It was determined a success, although Western observers claim their purpose was to rendezvous in space, connect, and return together to Earth. Nevertheless, the flights of Tereshkova and Bykovsky brought Russian manned spaceflight experience to 382 hours, as compared to the 53 hours attained thus far by the United States. Cause enough to declare a national holiday. We have logged 53 man-in-space hours so far. 2,000 are required before we attempt to land the first men on the moon. American engineers and scientists working on Project Apollo are confident that prerequisite can be met before 1970. They also feel that in certain critical flight areas where miniaturization and power systems are the key elements, we are well ahead of the Russians. However, to meet the 1970 target date, the money and manpower deemed necessary 3 years ago cannot be reduced. Yet, this June, in the Senate, an amendment to cut the 1965 space budget by 10%, or $500 million, was narrowly defeated by a vote of 43 to 38. Obviously, second thoughts on the validity of our race for the moon are becoming increasingly widespread. But can we turn back? This new playground is located outside Houston, Texas. It is adjacent to a new government facility created to originate and execute all manned space programs. Thousands of families whose heads have responsible positions at the installation are relocating here in several large planned communities. The homes they are buying in this area, until recently as swampland, range in cost from $20,000 to $40,000. These people don't anticipate any change in our national policy. They intend to stay a long time. The Manned Spacecraft Center itself is now nearing completion at a cost of $150 million. One of its major functions will be to determine how and if Apollo will withstand the rigors of its lunar flight. In order to accommodate the entire Apollo system, we have built the largest vacuum chamber in the world. Here we will test the craft's reliability in the duplicated, airless environment of space. Another unique facility of the Houston complex is its Communications and Control Center, headed by Christopher Columbus Kraft, former operations director for Project Mercury. Scheduled for completion by mid-1965, the center will be the main point of contact with all spaceborne astronauts. Moreover, all spacecraft control will be directed from here, both for Apollo flights and projected trips to Venus and Mars. Forthcoming manned missions will range not hundreds of miles into space, but hundreds of thousands of miles, demanding the ultimate sophistication in electronic systems. Equipment and techniques at Houston will be so refined, so flexible, that controllers will be able to train one space crew while simultaneously directing the flight of another and the recovery of a third. The instruments will also determine whether a mission should be continued or aborted. This, then, will be the heart of the Manned Spacecraft Center, a giant laboratory created to assure a successful landing on the moon and safe return in this decade. Responsible for the design and development of the Apollo spacecraft itself is Dr. Joseph Shea, 37-year-old engineer and scientist. You mentioned the problems. What in particular do you have here in this program?
The biggest problem is the meshing problem and the working problem. We have, just on the spacecraft part of the program, some 130,000 people working in various plants around the country. And I think, from my point of view, the biggest job is to be sure that all these people are well motivated and are able to do their job with sufficient rigor so that problems don't show up in flight.
Can we make it, do you think, by 1970?
I'm very encouraged. Just within the last 2 weeks, I've been on a tour of all of our major subcontractors, and in plants all around the country, the hardware is just beginning to come into fruition.
To meet Project Apollo's target date, research, development, and training processes must be carried out concurrently with the actual spacecraft production. More than 5,000 companies are now engaged in the program, and in several cases, whole communities are dependent upon NASA contracts. This year, 75% of the space agency's $5.2 billion budget has been allocated to the lunar project. To the American taxpayer, this means $10 million a day, a sum of unprecedented size for a non-military objective. Perhaps the most unique aspect of this $30 billion goal is the reliance on a small group of men for its ultimate success. But space exploration at this time is still a new, inexact science. And no matter how well prepared the men and machines may be, the possibility of failure will loom over every mile of the monumental journey. Is a trip to the moon at all necessary? Are we racing with ourselves? Can we benefit here on Earth from the technological achievements of Project Apollo? Questions are currently being raised and provocatively argued. But for this fiscal year, unless Congress reduces Apollo appropriations, they will remain academic. The budget continues in the high priority class. Before men are sent to the moon, a number of instrumented packages must precede them. The first of these, Ranger, has televised the moon's surface to determine a landing site for the Apollo crew. The pictures were taken as it descended for a crash landing. Developed by Jet Propulsion Laboratories under a $200 million program, Ranger failed 4 times before successfully relaying these pictures. Sometime in 1965, Surveyor will be ready for launching. This complex laboratory, built by Hughes Aircraft at a cost of $125 million, will land and relay back to Earth vital data on radiation hazards and other phenomena. It will also take a sample of the lunar crust and analyze it. This 2-man capsule, Gemini, represents the next phase in Project Apollo. Built by the McDonnell Aircraft Corporation, the capsule is part of a $1 billion program in which 10 manned flights will be conducted solely in Earth orbit for spaceflight experience. Gemini's design will permit the astronauts to leave the capsule. They will be able to conduct experiments and make repairs while floating free in space. Because he will be in orbit for periods up to 14 days, the Gemini's astronaut must drastically reorient his living habits to cope with his weightless environment. Freeze-dried foods, reconstituted with water, will provide his main sustenance. The Titan II, an intercontinental missile produced by the Martin Company, is the Gemini launch vehicle. The first manned flight is scheduled for late this year, following a series of unmanned launches. More than 1,000 hours in space will be logged by Gemini missions before the NASA program is completed. Manned launches will continue to be made from Cape Kennedy, while flight control will be directed from the new Houston Center. Nearing the final stages of development is the Apollo spacecraft itself, the system which will carry 3 men into lunar orbit and back to Earth. Twice the size of the Gemini capsule, it weighs 5 tons and has been constructed to withstand the searing heat of planetary re-entry. The Apollo command vehicle is being manufactured by North American Aviation under a $1 billion NASA contract. Its first Earth orbital flight, with 3 men on board, is scheduled for 1967. Although the first lunar mission will last only 7 days, the module is designed to house in its 11 by 13-foot structure more than 2 weeks' supplies of life-sustaining materials. Another feature of this craft is its ability to be maneuvered in the atmosphere somewhat like an airplane. Countless tests in the laboratory and in flight will provide the confidence required for the actual moonshot. Here, the escape rocket lifts the command module in a test simulating an abort off the launch pad. This would take place during countdown and within microseconds of any technical failure. The moon's gravity is 1/6 that of the Earth, and man will have to develop new techniques for locomotion on the lunar surface. Here at Grumman Aircraft, an astronaut experiments with entering and leaving his lunar vehicle with a rig that reduces his weight by 5/6. The vehicle is called the Lunar Excursion Module, or LEM, and is being built at a cost of more than $600 million. The first flight model is scheduled for delivery in 1966. Perhaps the most intricate maneuver eventually required by the Apollo mission will be the rejoining of LEM, the lunar landed vehicle, with the moon orbiting command module in which the men will return to Earth. This technique, known as rendezvous, will be perfected in the Gemini program, both in ground training with simulators and in Earth orbit flights themselves. Rocket power, the key to a successful lunar mission and the area in which the space program has advanced most rapidly since 1961. All major research and development of the giant rockets is being conducted at Huntsville, Alabama. Here at the Marshall Space Flight Center, the family of super boosters called Saturn is tested and ready for launch from Cape Kennedy. Chrysler and Boeing are the prime contractors for this project, which will culminate in the immense Apollo booster Saturn V. This is an engineering mock-up of the Saturn V tail section. Comprised of 5 F1 engines, the flight vehicle will generate 7.5 million pounds of thrust, equivalent to the horsepower of 2 million automobiles. Saturn V will launch the 45-ton Apollo system on its lunar trajectory. It will be the most powerful rocket ever built. Bernard Tessmann, Deputy Director of the Test Laboratory at Marshall, is supervising the construction of the Saturn V static test stand. The concrete tower, costing $30 million, is the largest of its kind in the world. First firings on this stand will commence in December. They will be the next crucial step in the race for the moon. What do you think of the 1970 target date for the moon program?
Well, we better make it. I'm very confident that we will do, and as far as things went so far, it looks very promising.
You think we'll make it?
Yes, we will make it.
What if the Russians got there first?
Well, good for them, but I would say we have a good chance this time to beat them, I hope. Also, we should not be confused by the quietness from their side. As you probably know, they always did work behind the fence, and once they were first. But I hope this time we will beat them.
It appears that Apollo will meet its projected 1970 target date. The Russian timetable, if there is one, remains unknown. Because there is no atmosphere on the moon, its physical appearance and composition are the same today as they were 1 billion years ago. Once we finally understand the moon's makeup, we may very well determine the origin of the Earth itself. However, political and military incentives are the more immediate justifications given for our race to the moon. But how much worldly wealth and manpower these objectives are worth, and how urgently they are needed, remain subjects of heated controversy. We met in Washington with a number of lawmakers, among them Paul Douglas, senior senator from Illinois. Senator Douglas, what do you think of the Apollo program to put a man on the moon by 1970?
I think it will cost altogether too much. $30 billion, a lot of money. In my judgment, it could be better spent by individuals themselves, sending their kids to college, putting a new room on the house, planting flowers, taking a vacation, or, if we want to do it collectively, and I think we should do some of this, a mass attack on poverty through education, an attempt to find the causes and cure of cancer, a move to improve housing, and a whole series of things that we need, far more important than the mere stunt of getting a man on the moon.
What if the Russians get there first?
Well, what of it? What purpose is there to get ahead of another nation to a place where there's no use going to in the first place?
Congressman James Corman represents the 22nd District of California, an area rich in space contracts.
Now, $5 billion is a lot of money. Actually, that's about 2/3 as much as we spend for tobacco each year. It's about half as much as we spend for liquor each year. And it's a little less than 1/10 as much as we spend on national defense. It's my own view that this expenditure is clearly justified in the national interest and the welfare of the people who live on this planet.
Your district, Mr. Corman, includes much of the new space science and industry. Would you feel the same about the moon program if you represented, say, a Midwest farming area?
I would not support a program of this size just because of its impact on industry in our district. This is a national program, and it's of national importance. And actually, it's of importance to this world. Now, we talk about this first objective of putting a man on the moon. That in itself is a very dramatic and exciting event. But what we're really doing is searching for new knowledge which will benefit mankind. And man has never been able to anticipate the benefit to him of newfound knowledge. It's always much greater than he thinks when he first undertakes it. This is the justification for the American people putting the emphasis and the effort that they are in the space program.
Dr. Philip Abelson is director of the Carnegie Geophysical Laboratory and editor of Science magazine. We asked his opinion of the value of manned exploration.
We could find out most of the important answers unmanned. In fact, if it were impossible to send a man there, we could get all the information we would need with unmanned flights. The reason for sending man is really an emotional reason.
Overall, our plan is to put a man on the moon by 1970 at a cost of more than $30 billion. Do you see in this program any dangers, any particular problems?
I see at least two problems. One of them is that after we've spent all this money and all this energy and perhaps succeed in putting a man on the moon, that then after that, our people will be disillusioned. They will see that our political system has been so inept that it was willing to spend that much money for such a trivial purpose. A second problem comes from our becoming dependent upon the space program as an economic shot in the arm. We are now spending somewhat more than $5 billion a year on it, and by 1970 that program will be so entrenched in the economy that it will be very difficult to cut it off.
Dr. Robert Siemens is Associate Administrator of NASA. We asked him to outline the agency's reasoning for manned lunar exploration.
The man himself can do certain things that are very difficult to instrument. For example, the man can place a seismic element on the moon in the right place to pick up vibrations that may occur in the lunar surface. A man can pick out samples of material from the lunar surface and bring them back in the lunar excursion module and hence back to Earth. Man can, of course, recognize the unexpected, and we can never program an unmanned vehicle to do the unexpected. And for these reasons, a combination of the unmanned and the manned will give us the greatest opportunity to maximize the scientific return from this lunar exploration.
Can we make it by 1970?
Yes, we believe that we can make it by 1970, but we want to raise three cautions. One, that we don't run into some unexpected technological problem. Second, that we don't run into some unexpected environmental condition in the vicinity of the moon or on the lunar surface. And thirdly, that we continue with a national determination to proceed towards this goal.
Edwin Diamond is senior editor of Newsweek magazine and author of the new book, The Rise and Fall of the Space Age.
The president said sometime in this decade. Now, why the rush? Why the hurry? The moon has been there for eons and will continue to be there. I'm not a stay-at-home type. I want to go too. But why are we rushing? We're rushing, we are told, in order to beat the Russians there. But no one has produced any evidence that I've seen which indicates that the Soviet Union is, in fact, intent upon landing men on the moon in a great rush. And if this is the case, we may be racing ourselves, which is a more costly enterprise and perhaps a more dangerous one. There are, I think James Webb of NASA has estimated that 22,000 separate acts must be performed from Earth to moon. Now, if any one of these things goes wrong, the trip might end in a national tragedy of unprecedented dimension.
If the Russians are not trying to beat us, why are we doing it?
This is my contention that the space program is off target. The original impetus, the original thrust was to beat the Soviet Union to the moon. Now that we're racing ourselves, other reasons are used to prop up the space program. We are told, for example, that the space program will provide jobs, that the space program will take up the slack in as defense expenditures drop off, that space will provide astronomical fallout in the form of new products, new processes, new techniques for industry. All of these reasons are, I think, highly dubious ones.
Dr. Edward Welsh is acting chairman of the National Aeronautics and Space Council. He is the president's chief space advisor.
Dr. Welch, it's generally agreed the moon has no military value. If that's so, how do we justify our accelerated Apollo program?
It is true that there is no real military value to the moon as a place from which to launch missiles or to have other military significance. However, the development of the competence to get to the moon has real military significance. The rendezvousing techniques, electronics, the control, the training of the astronauts, and all the rest has real military significance, and the moonshot has given a real target to attain that objective.
If the 1970 target date were to be dropped and the budget reduced, would these alterations create serious problems?
The serious aspect of this is, first of all, that it will cost a lot more money if it's delayed. We'll have idle facilities, we'll have disbanded teams of competent personnel and things of that sort, which will greatly add to the cost. We'll also, of course, give a greater advantage to the Soviets that they might get there first, and I consider that serious also.
What if our first attempt to land a man fails?
Well, if the first attempt fails, the answer is simple. We'll try again. Well, of course, there'll be some adverse effect to the program if there's a casualty involved or casualties involved, but we have to take that into consideration and continue on for the objective even though there is a casualty. We hope there won't be any, and we're planning all the safety measures that we can.
Senator William Proxmire of Wisconsin is an active member of the Senate Appropriations Committee.
Do you have any reservations, Senator, about the Apollo program?
Yes, indeed. I have very definite reservations about the Apollo program. I have reservations with regard to its cost. It's an enormously expensive program. It's the most rapidly, it has been the most rapidly rising program in terms of cost that we've had in the federal government. It seems to have leveled off somewhat now, but at a very, very high level. And also I have reservation in terms of the cost in manpower.
But if we didn't go all out, and if the Russians got there first, wouldn't it be a disastrous blow to American prestige and power?
Oh, absolutely not. I don't think it's any disaster if the Soviets beat us to the moon. After all, the Soviets were first with a Sputnik. They've been first right along, and we haven't suffered any really disastrous drop, I think, in public esteem. I think it would be better, of course, if we were first. I hope we are. And I want us to go all out, but I want the space agency to be able to prove to the Congress that every nickel of these expenditures are necessary. And it seems to me that there's a great deal of waste, a great deal of money that has been spent that cannot be justified on this basis. But to get back to your fundamental question, after all, what is really important in the eyes of the world, in the eyes of Americans and Russians, is not who is first in space, but who is first right here on Earth.
Dr. Martin Schwarzschild is professor of astronomy at Princeton University and an eminent space theoretician.
Dr. Schwarzschild, if the top scientists of the world were gathered together and given $30 billion, would they spend it going to the moon?
If I take your question exactly as you ask it, I think my answer would have to be definitely no. But I really think your question is wrong. I think your question does not imply the real situation in this country as it is. I think the real question is whether we want to be a great nation, accepting a challenge of the opportunities that are given to us, or whether we want to relax in lethargy and spiritually die. We were given this opportunity by the Russians, by their Sputniks. That hurt our pride. That got us going. And we accepted that challenge. And now we are in a happy and gay and great competition. And that are that kind of competitions, I think that in history so often have driven people to their greatest efforts.
But wouldn't it be better to direct this same scientific talent and these same billions of dollars against such problems as mental illness, cancer, poverty?
But you see, your question implies that if we go into this endeavor of landing on the moon, that we will do less in those areas. I think that if we now would relax and give up the undertaking of going to the moon, we would in fact do less of all the other fine activities too. I feel that the endeavor of landing on the moon must be the spearhead that gives us the energy and the spirit to undertake all the other ethical duties which you mentioned and which I fully agree we must attack.
The controversial Apollo program represents the most expensive and complex scientific endeavor ever undertaken by any country in history. But its ultimate success will depend upon the discipline and control man can exercise over his own faculties. Before he goes to the moon, he must explore further many unknown facets of his physical and psychological capabilities. An area of great concern is the effect of prolonged weightlessness on the human system. At a recent international space conference in Florence, Italy, Russian physicians reported that 2 cosmonauts suffered severe after effects from long-duration flights. One of the major objectives of the upcoming Gemini missions is to resolve this perplexing question. With manned space exploration now a firm national commitment, the team of astronauts is being steadily enlarged. Started in 1959 with 7 military test pilots, the program today is comprised of 29 men, and over the next few years will be increased to 50. Russell Schweikert and Edward White are candidates for the first trip to the moon. At 28, Russell is the youngest member of the group and one of 3 civilians in the program. At the time of his selection, he was a research scientist at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
The idea of being one of those to get out there never entered my mind seriously until just this past year. The prerequisite for being a test pilot was dropped, and I realized that this opened the door. And of course, feeling very presumptuous, I put in an application and consider myself lucky enough to have been selected. Well, since we started here, we've been going through an academic training session, and this academic training has involved just about everything you can imagine which has to do with getting spacecraft into the air and back down to Earth safely. This has covered such subjects as astronomy, aerodynamics for the reentry portions and the launch, orbital and ballistic flight, one which we're going on reasonably strong now, and that is geology, in that the geologist has the most to learn immediately from man setting foot on the lunar surface. I don't know, as I have before me a single goal that is stepping onto the moon. There's no question at all that I would like very much to do that, and I'm going to be in there scrambling. But I certainly would not feel as though I were cheated or anything of this sort were I not selected. This is much too large a project to have any ideas of I deserve this or I deserve that. Certainly hope to be the man who plants his foot on the lunar dust or the lunar basalt or the lunar whatever. But whether or not I do, I'm very thankful to be in this space program, and there's nothing that's going to change my mind on that.
At 33, Edward White has 2 years of astronaut training behind him. Formerly an Air Force experimental test pilot, he also holds a Master of Science degree.
What we actually expect to find up on the moon, this is what we're studying right now. Exactly what we will find there, though, I don't believe we'll really know truly until somebody steps out on the lunar surface and picks up a piece of it and brings it back. If I'm the first one to step out on the moon, it's something that at that time I will have worked for 10 years toward doing. I think it'll be the culmination of a big ambition of mine. The reason that I myself would like to participate in the space program is that as a pilot, this is the next step forward. Aviation is one phase, space exploration is the next phase. As a test pilot, this is the phase that I would like to have a part of. As an individual, I feel I have something that I can contribute to the program. I think we as a nation have an inquisitiveness about what is out in space. We have explored just about everything there is here on the Earth. This is the next logical step, and I think if we don't do it here in the United States, I'm sure that some other country will.
At present, the United States intends to launch Project Apollo to the moon before 1970. Cape Kennedy will be the focal point of world attention at that historic time, the time when the rewards of 9 years' labor may finally be realized. The Saturn V rocket, on which our hopes are based, will stand twice as high as this 180-foot vehicle, the most recently launched super booster. With the countdown underway, the hundreds of thousands of components and systems, each one critical to the mission's success, will be checked and double-checked.
Water system ready? Affirmative. I have a flip complete light. Lock tanking secured? Lock tanking secured. T-minus 27 seconds and counting. All recorders and oscillographs to fast. Vernier start.
Although each phase of the epic voyage will have been rehearsed both on Earth and in space, confidence on this day will be tempered by the awesome implications of the bold experiment. And the 3 astronauts, sealed in the command module for the past 3 hours, will shortly assume the most profound responsibility of their lives.
Ignition. Water flow. Main stage. 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition.
As the 3,000-ton spaceship propels itself toward the moon, an anxious world will be introduced to the most exciting chapter in space exploration. 2.5 minutes after launch, the Saturn V booster will burn out at an altitude of 50 miles, having gulped 4.5 million pounds of fuel. Now, nearing the Earth orbit altitude of 120 miles, Apollo has acquired a speed of 17,500 miles an hour. During orbit, astronauts and ground computers will check all systems for lunar trajectory. The third stage reignites and drives Apollo out of orbit. Now, moving in space at 25,000 miles an hour, the command module flips around to rendezvous with the LEM. For the remainder of the 70-hour flight, the astronauts enter a prescribed routine of monitoring systems, making course corrections and conducting experiments. Approaching orbit 90 miles above the moon, the Apollo craft slows to 4,000 miles an hour. The 2 astronauts selected to land will then crawl into LEM. LEM is released from the command module and goes into an orbit which carries it to within 10 miles of the surface. The astronauts scout for a precise touchdown point near the lunar equator. When the landing place is determined, the LEM will hover briefly, then land like a helicopter. If the primary tenet for the Apollo deadline date is correct, the mission commander will be the first human being to set foot on the lunar surface. Now man will experience the sensations he has so long anticipated. The utter silence of an atmosphereless land. The view of more than 5,000 brilliant stars. The sight of a huge luminous globe, the Earth, beyond a startlingly close horizon. The 2 men, in constant communication with the Houston Center, will alternately explore the moon for 4-hour spells. They will take photographs, collect rock samples, and plant seismic instruments. 24 hours later, the astronauts will launch LEM and rejoin the navigator in the command ship. The reduced lunar gravity permits this crucial maneuver to be made with only 3,000 pounds of thrust. After rendezvous, with the crew safe in the mothership, the LEM is discarded to become a man-made satellite of the moon. The return trip now begins, requiring a more precise flight path than the first 70-hour journey. The re-entry corridor is only 40 miles high and 300 miles wide, and will be slammed into at 25,000 miles an hour. As the Earth atmosphere abruptly cuts its speed to 500 miles an hour, the module's nose will heat to 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit. At 13,500 feet, the ring sail parachutes will blossom and lower the Apollo module to its final destination, a plain in northern Texas. An incredible voyage of discovery will have reached its end, and once again, man will have realized a dream. There is little question that Americans will one day land on the moon. But today, in light of the increasing number of Earth-borne problems, Apollo's national priority, both in talent and cost, is coming under closer public scrutiny. And although the recent success of Ranger 7 has renewed public interest in the program, the forthcoming national election is provoking renewed criticism of it from many political quarters. The controversy over Apollo's 1970 target date now stands at this point. On the one hand, its supporters claim the prestige and technological knowledge to be gained by the United States in landing men on the moon in this dramatically short time completely justify its expense. On the other hand, critics of this goal believe the $30 billion cost far exceeds the value of these rewards. That first, a complete space competence must be achieved over however many years it may require, so that the great moonshot itself can evolve naturally and not under forced draft. Whether or not we continue our race for the moon at its present pace is a decision which ultimately must be made by the American people themselves.